Do you want Instagrammers or TikTokers to post about your brand? Or do you actually want to engage creators who influence their audience to buy your product? If you're in the latter of those two, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Winfluence, the Influence Marketing Podcast. Hello again, friends. Thanks for tuning in to Winfluence, the Influence Marketing Podcast. Those of you who have watched or listened to Winfluence for a while know that I got my professional start in radio. I marched myself into the local radio station at 14 years old and said, I want to be a DJ. And for some reason, they said, okay, you start Friday. I pursued radio through high school and college, navigated the world of broadcasting and sports, hoping to one day land at ESPN. I actually interviewed there the same week I interviewed for its parent company, ABC. My first full-time job out of college wound up being a producer at ABC Radio Sports in New York. My experiences including working on a nationally syndicated radio show, managing stringers and reporters for day-to-day sports coverage, producing longer-form feature pieces you could argue were essentially podcasts, but this was well before most people had even access to the internet at home or devices, bandwidth, and such. They weren't really even affordable back then, or even possible in some circumstances compared to what we have today. We talk about influence on this show, and radio is one of those mediums that we are quick to overlook. My mother actually developed a nationally recognized award-winning communications program a few years back in my small hometown in eastern Kentucky. It wound up being such a success because she knew what most of us forget. It's a rural community, and in a rural community, the local morning show DJ is probably the most influential person in town outside of the county judge. Tony Garcia knows the power of radio. Like me, he worked in the broadcasting industry back in the 1990s. He's the co-founder of a company called Now Media. You may not recognize that name, but the other company he co-founded in conjunction with it is The Bob and Sherry Show. It is a nationally syndicated radio show hosted by Bob Lacey and Sherry Lynch. They're based in Charlotte, but syndicated on 70 affiliates across the United States. The weekday morning show is also heard in 177 countries and on 150 ships at sea along the American Forces Network. Now, a traditional terrestrial radio show isn't something you'd think would flourish in our on-demand, always connected internet world. But the Bob and Sherry Show is different. Not only have they spun the show and segments of it into podcasts and an active social media presence, which includes a Facebook group number of over 115,000 members, but they have hacked the advertising and sponsorship model for even small businesses. When I learned that, I knew we had to have Tony on the show because what they've built is a hidden gem of influence, both online and off, and we can learn from them. Tony Garcia of the Bob and Sherry Show is coming up on Winfluence. As always, this episode of Winfluence is presented by Scipio.ai. Scipio helps brands transform their digital marketing with user-generated content, videos, and images at scale. Why would we do that? Well, Shopify data shows user-generated content quadruples your ad click-through rates. UGC drives as much as 7 times more engagement on social media, improves website conversions by as much as 29%, and improves email click-through rates by as much as 73%. UGC is also more trusted by consumers than even traditional influencer content. That's yet another reason we like to talk about user-generated content and Scipio.ai a lot. Scipio.ai plugs you into your own community of users who create great content or a more broad set of content creators and helps you engage them to do it for your brand. Your digital marketing campaigns perform better. You don't have to go looking for content to use for paid or owned campaigns. And you've got a team to manage it all for you at Scipio.ai if you like. Come see us at Scipio.ai if you want me to personally show you the platform and how we can solve your digital marketing performance problems with high-performing user-generated content. Just go to jasonfalls.co/Scipio, and that's spelled CIPIO. jasonfalls.co/Scipio. Fill out that form, and I will personally set up a time to chat with you and show you the platform. jasonfalls.co/Scipio. Influence happens online and offline, and the Bob and Sherry Show has hacked the approach. Co-founder and producer Tony Garcia from the show is next on Winfluence. Tony, I think the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, terrestrial radio has, been, at least from a mainstream consumer's perspective who doesn't know the ins and outs of the broadcast world, terrestrial radio has been on a crazy decline from their perspective over the course of the last probably 10 or 15 years. Take us through a little bit of the challenges that you guys have faced as a terrestrial radio entity, and how have you navigated that evolution to be able to not just survive but thrive today?
Sure, and it's I think it's sort of an interesting one because we've lived through a lot of it. When we first took the Bob and Sherry show out into national syndication, the guy who hired me said, "Hey, so what's the first thing you're going to do? Call those guys in New York at CBS?" And I'm like, "No. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on small and medium-sized owners for whom we could have a personal relationship, or with whom we could have a personal relationship, and for whom the content that we produced really mattered." And so we started doing that, and that's how we sort of built the company. Of course, then consolidation came in. And we had one very major company that I won't name now, but they're near and dear to my heart. And they bought 20 of our affiliates in 1 year and signed us off 18 of them, whether or not we were number 1, number 2, number 42. And they did it because they wanted to keep all of their programming in their programming family. Yep. So we continued to focus on small and medium market operators, and we do to this day, because we can have a personal relationship with those broadcasters. I've sent christening gifts and communion gifts, and it's really nice to be able to do that. Unfortunately, that's a dying breed. Yep. And on top of that, when a company like some of these big consolidators that have hundreds and hundreds of radio stations, when they do something, even the smaller independent guys follow suit. And a lot of that is around cost cutting, yep. Letting people go, and not putting the resources into the radio station that used to be there. So there's not a live person at night anymore. And if you don't have the live person at night, who's going to go to the Christmas parade? Who's going to go to those local community events where those of us who grew up with radio remember going to those things and seeing, oh, wow, that's what Jay Knight looks like. And oh, wow, I get to meet him. And right, I shook his hand and he gave me a bumper sticker. Those days are really gone because of all those cuts. There's no staffing to go to these things. And I think, and I've said this publicly to others, one of the things that's happened in the radio business in the last 20 years is we forgot we're in show business. Mm. And we remembered we're in the advertising business. We sure do want to sell you some spots, but we forgot about the show business part of it, that when a radio station shows up at a retail location, it's an event. Yeah. And we ought to treat it as an event, because if we don't, and that listener comes up and it's lackluster, yeah, then they're going to walk away with that exact impression of us, that we're lackluster, or, oh yeah, the station was there. And I'll give you a case in point. Tuesday night, today's Thursday, so Tuesday night, we went to a concert. I live in Denver. We went to a concert at Ball Arena, and one of the radio stations had their van set up and a tent set up. And it's the first time I'd been to an event at that arena and seen a radio station set up. I'm like, wow, a radio station is set up here. And they had their tent, and they had a table, and they had two people standing behind the table, and they had absolutely nothing on the table. Not a keychain, not a bumper sticker, not a decal, not a card that said, here's our talent, or nothing. So why go? And by the way, no one was at their tent, which should come as a shock to absolutely no one, because there was no reason to go. There was no fun. There was no showbiz there, while 16,000 people are walking into an arena to see a show. and it's a head scratcher for me because I came up understanding that we have to have there has to be a little bit of sparkle to this.
Well, and I think your point is there's an interesting parallel to draw to content creators online today, because it's not just about taking pictures of your food anymore. It's not just about the day-to-day interactions. It's about creating content in almost an entertainment-driven show business type way,
yeah.
in order for that audience to really maintain that interest. Now, in that same sort of parallel, your focus on going out to those small to medium markets, having a personal relationship with the affiliates that you're working with back in the day, was probably a little bit before the whole social media movement came out. But that's really what the whole social media movement was. It was about stripping away the big corporate brand entities and getting back to more one-on-one communication. Was this that concept of what's happening in the social world in your mind then, or it sounds to me like you guys
I wish I could take credit for it. No, the idea that we had in our mind was to be as connected to the markets as possible. And when you're in syndication, there's any number of obstacles, right, that you have to overcome, objections you have to overcome. Oh, they're not talking about stuff going on in my market. Oh, they can't come to the market. So we made it a point early on to say, we will come to your market. Now, it's going to cost you something because you have to pay for a plane ticket and whatnot, but we will come to your market if there's something going on that's important. For an example, we've been to Aberdeen, South Dakota, which is about 3 miles north of Sioux Falls.
Okay.
And a great small town in the Midwest. We've been there 3 or 4 times. I want to say 4 times to host a fundraiser for the Boys and Girls Clubs of that market. And so we fly in, we do a little meet and greet with their folks, and then Bob and Sherry give a talk, probably 20, 25 minutes, about how important those people who have paid money to be part of that banquet, how important that income is to support the programs that the Boys and Girls Clubs are doing. That's the kind of stuff that we want to be able to do, and we're still doing that. We are doing a little bit less of it now. Again, going back to what I said earlier, the economics of radio have changed so significantly that, and of course the pandemic. But before the pandemic, I mean, we were traveling 2 or 3 times a month all year round.
Wow.
So there was a lot of road work. And that slowed down during the Great Recession. It started to slow down a little bit. And then with the pandemic, obviously it stopped. And it's come back a little bit, but really not that much because the economics of the industry haven't changed. So it's harder for those organizations to bring us in because of the expense involved with it. And they've got to liquidate these things, right? It's a business at the end of the day. So you can't bring Bob and Sherry into the market and lose money on the deal.
Right. Very
so,
true.
Yeah, but we still love doing it.
Well, and I keep thinking of, I mean, I would say you're probably breathing a sigh of relief that on one hand, on the other hand, not, that the economics of the business are such that you can't really do that as much, because I would think scaling travel like that for a nationally syndicated show that's in 70 markets, that's got to be crazy to have to manage all the logistics of it.
Yeah, it is hard to do. And some places like Aberdeen, South Dakota, they're not easy to get to because they're not major airport locations, right? So you have the not only getting there part of it, right? And then you've got to be there for a couple of days. So that there's a logistic things to it. There's expenses to it and whatnot. But yeah, it's definitely an economic challenge. We'd like to see stations do more of it. When we had a lot of it, we did a little bit of juggling. So we would do like a swing. So I'll give you an example. So and that helps everybody. And we're still open to doing that if we can get the stations together. And an example of a swing would be, we have a station in Nashville, and we have a station in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and we have a station in Lexington, Kentucky. Let's do them all in one weekend.
Yep.
So we'll fly into Nashville. We'll go to Bowling Green, which you could pretty much drive to if you wanted to. And then from Bowling Green, we could drive again to Lexington within a couple hours. And so on a weekend, we can do Friday night in one place, Saturday in another place, Sunday in another place kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that was, and then everybody splits the cost of the travel. And now it's not crazy. Now it's a little bit more manageable, to do that. I think the other challenge that radio stations face is where to do these things. I think we've all learned that car dealer remotes don't really work. I'm sorry, a little inside baseball here, but it's great. Oh yeah, we're going to put up a tent and come down. But there isn't a listener on the planet that doesn't know that when they showed up that car dealer remote, somebody's going to want to get a test drive.
Yep.
Right. So there's some of these places that are, radio stations continue to do this, but they're not really conducive to meeting with radio personalities because they're pressure situations. For a while, we were being invited to cell phone stores, and that's another place where it's sort of a higher pressure situation. You don't go into the cell phone operator's store to go get a cable. You get the cable at Walmart, right? If you're going in there, you're trying to get a new service or a new phone or whatever, and there's a little bit more pressure there than if we were going to a coffee shop or a wine and cheese bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
A wine cafe. Now that's different, and those tend to be the events that work better for us because we deal with an older audience. This audience been there and done that. They went to the mall, they saw Tiffany, they got the T-shirt, and they got their friendship bracelets. Although I understand they're coming back now with Taylor Swift, and they're not doing that anymore. So we're not bringing them to a shopping mall. We're better off bringing them to a place that's a little bit more intimate, a little bit more, I don't want to really even say upscale because there's upscale malls, but a little bit more intimate and a little bit more grown up than a shopping mall. And some markets have those and some markets frankly don't. Yeah. So that's the other challenge that we deal with in the current environment.
So I know that sort of, again, one-to-one, medium, small market personalization of the business of the syndicate and the radio show and whatnot actually mirrors really the approach of the show and the show's content. And I'd love to have you touch on that because for the people who don't know, the Bob and Sherry show's been around for almost 30 years. Syndicated a bunch of different places. And back in the day when I was working in syndicated radio, there was the morning show and it was the morning zoo and it was zany and comedy and sketch and goofy stuff. And everybody knows those morning shows. Some of them still exist. Mm-hmm. But Bob and Sherry approached things in a very different way, but I think there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, I think, I think that's true. I think that was one of our challenges when we launched, because the expectation was it was going to be some sort of a morning zoo, and there were going to be 4 or 5 people in there, and there was going to be all this zaniness going on. I like that. I like the word zany because I think it's really appropriate in this case. Yeah, there's a lot of voices, and there are still some very successful shows doing that. Mm-hmm. Bob and Sherry was always different. Bob and Sherry is improvisational, and it is 2 people talking about whatever they want to be talking about. It's not based necessarily in pop culture, although they talk about it a little bit. It's more based in their life experiences. And while they'll talk about pop culture, they'll talk about non-political current events, which is much harder to do these days than it was in the past. It's improvisational. And as a result, the pacing is different. The pacing of the show is different because it's more conversational and it's a slower pace than the bang, 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 bang of a zoo or an ensemble show. Mm-hmm. We also don't do any of the devices that other shows do. They do them well, so this isn't necessarily a knock, and the listeners respond to them. But we don't do sort of the War of the Roses, where someone sends roses to his girlfriend and then they tell his wife. We just don't think that's particularly funny for our demographic. Second of all, that's not really happening. Those are actors. Yeah. There's another one called Second Date Update, where they get the 2 people who went on the second date together, and invariably it was a disaster, right? Because why wouldn't you don't get on the air if it's not a disaster, right? Mm-hmm. And again, these are actors that are doing these things, and there's phone scams and there's whatnot. and we've been doing these on radio for literally since before you and I were born. And the audience, in most cases, the audience knows they're actors, but they think it's funny and they go along with it. I don't do any of that stuff in Bob and Sherry. Right. It's authentic. It is, and they don't where some morning shows will sit down and go, okay, we're going to do this, and then you're going to do that, and it's not staged at all. Yeah. They do their prep separately. In fact, the first time I sat in the studio with them, I thought they hated each other because in between their talk breaks, they didn't talk to each other.
Yeah,
they were going to do the different prep, and then a few minutes before they go on the air, Sherry says something like, "I have this thing from National Geographic," and Bob will go, "Okay," and then they just went. So it's a much different thing. And I know that for some of our affiliates, especially at the beginning when they first start with us, they really don't know what to make of it because it paces like a talk show. It paces like NPR. It doesn't pace like commercial radio does. So that was a little bit of a challenge. Having said that, on the back end, there's an authenticity to the show that the listeners really, really get and really, really connect with. We've got listeners that have been literally listening since almost day one and have followed us, along. And the other challenge that you face in syndication is in radio syndication, as you know, Jason, there's no such thing as a radio network in the sense of a television network.
Right.
So Survivor is on CBS and it's on all the CBS stations. It's just a matter of what time it's on, but it's on all the CBS stations. Everything we do in syndication is ad hoc. So you're not necessarily lined up with the same company all the way across the country. And those things change. Stations change formats. Stations decide they want to do something different. So we started in 2006 podcasting. Mm-hmm. And we've been podcasting ever since 2006. Started as a way to serve those listeners who become disenfranchised because the station gets sold, changed format, whatever. And it wasn't until more recently when we took the company independent that we actually started monetizing them. But we've been podcasting for so long that Apple didn't give out numbers. We do not have a number. It's an old feed burner RSS feed, and God forbid we have a problem with Apple. It takes them weeks to figure out who the heck we are. Yeah. But we've been doing it since back in the dark ages, and that's worked well for us because one of the things, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because as we've listened to the show, we go, this really was a podcast before it was. It was a podcast that we were putting on radio stations.
Yep.
Rather than building a podcast, because a thing didn't exist 30 years ago. But really, Bob and Sherry, I think, is a better podcast than it is a radio program. Although it's a really good radio program. So that's been an interesting, it's been an interesting thing that we've sort of come to discover. In fact, we had a woman that DM'd Sherry, it was probably 6 months ago, and said, "Would you please settle an argument with my friend?" And my friend says, "You guys actually are on the radio." And I told my friend, "You guys are a podcast. You guys aren't on the radio."
That's great.
Which I think tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and again, from my perspective as an observer of, primarily the social media influencer marketing space, but because I was also in radio back in the day when you guys were starting, that was when I was working in radio. I really feel like you guys were, and you should take credit for this. You were ahead of the curve on, from a business perspective, making this more about the one-to-one market-to-market relationship. You were ahead of the curve on the format of the show, making it much more authentic, much more. I know Regis and Kathy Lee used to say, "Hey, we don't talk to each other off the air because we want that conversation to be fresh every morning." Mm-hmm. So it's the same kind of approach there. That aligns with, and the way that you do it, the pacing and whatnot, which is podcast-like, as you said, it was a podcast before, podcasts were even a thing. So you guys, I think, were innovators, but you were just innovators in a different medium primarily. So you probably didn't get the credit that you deserved for that. And so I see what you guys are doing. And when we come back from the break here in just a second, I want to talk about the other thing that makes you guys really special, which is your new or newish approach to advertising. But I really feel like the show was so far ahead of the other media environment folks that it's really kind of a model for people to look at and say, hey, this is how you should have been doing it 15 years ago. They're still doing it. And it's probably one of the reasons why, as a syndicated radio show, you guys are still, very successful where a lot of others have died off.
Yeah, and it's a tough business, and we still have that. By the way, we still get that complaint. I had an affiliate drop the show a couple weeks ago. It's like, well, everybody thinks it's pacing too slow, and they don't like it. I'm like, well, who's they? Well, the manager. Is the manager in the demo? Well, not really. Okay, but you get a lot of that in radio.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. We are talking to Tony Garcia. He is the co-founder and I guess executive poobah producer, whatever, of the Bob and Sherry Show and Now Media. When we come back on the show, I want to dig in with Tony on his and their unique approach to advertising, which opens up opportunities on a nationally syndicated show for smaller businesses. So don't go away. Welcome back to Winfluence. Stroll down memory lane for me today, talking radio with Tony Garcia from the Bob and Sherry Show and Now Media. Before the break, we were talking about, and I honestly feel like, Tony, what you guys have done is really innovated, and you were, probably 5 or 6 years ahead of the curve of other people, even in the social media influencer marketing space, and doing and approaching what you're doing from a syndicated radio show perspective and doing it much more in a, what I would call a social way. But there are also some innovations you guys have brought to the table for advertisers and sponsors. They are the lifeblood of a radio program like yours, and can be the lifeblood of podcasts, especially if that podcast is the primary, mechanism for that person or entity to drive revenue. Explain how your approach to advertisers and sponsors has changed as social media and digital has come more to the forefront of how you deliver your content.
Yeah, sure. I mean, going back, and as you know, in your radio days, we've always used radio talent to endorse a product, right? Going back to, oh gosh, you can name all sorts, television, radio. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind isn't actually a radio show, but it's I Love Lucy, yep, which was sponsored by Chesterfield cigarettes, which is part of the reason why everybody was smoking on the show. It's probably why they all died young too. But Chesterfield was the presenting sponsor. You had radio talent that were the voices of a certain product. You had more recently guys like Paul Harvey, mm-hmm, who would do a commercial. You didn't even know you were getting a commercial until about 30 seconds in, and you go, that's an ad. That's not a news story. That's an ad. And he was sort of a genius at that approach to working that whatever spot is into the content. So all of a sudden, it was a commercial. You don't know it was a commercial. And so what we've started to do is take this little different approach. We became an independent company in 2017 that is owned by Sherry and myself. And one of the things that we saw, and we were talking about it earlier, was sort of the decline of the radio business. It's still, I want to say this to be very straight with everybody, it's still a very good business. Mm-hmm. We have some problems that we need to overcome with the audience, but it's still a very good business, and it's still a very powerful advertising medium. But in our portion of the industry, what we are paid on is audience. And if there are less people listening to the radio, there's less audience.
Yep.
And so in network radio doesn't care. And what I mean by that is the advertisers who come to network radio, they're looking for bulk. Yep. They want to cover as many people as they can in as many parts of the country as they can. And that's why when you listen to any sort of syndicated show or network radio show, you hear the big insurance companies, you hear the big box stores, and O'Reilly Auto Parts, the kind of places that are like on every corner, right? Yep. They're on every street corner. And radio for them network radio remains the most efficient way to reach, that audience. But that audience is slowly declining, and we're sort of like letting the air out of the balloon. We still have a very engaged audience, and so we've tried to build ways for us to engage with that audience in different ways. So we've built a newsletter, an opt-in newsletter. We never spam the audience. It's a monthly newsletter. They're going to get information about the show and stories that are tangent to the program. During the pandemic, we started doing a live streamed happy hour on Facebook. In fact, we're doing one tonight because it's a Thursday night. We do it most Thursday nights. The talent get on, and I think it's really important, Jason, to say that we don't get on and say, hey, we got a great contest for you tomorrow. Come and listen. What we do is we have a conversation with the listeners.
Mm-hmm.
We're literally reading that chat stream. And if one listener says they lost their dog, hey, how Fluffy crossed the Rainbow Ridge. Let's all let's all have a thought in our mind today for, Gladys. We do shout outs. Hey, shout out to Presque Isle, Maine. Shout out to Grand Junction, Colorado. So it's more it's to the degree that you can be interactive on Facebook. We are interactive with that audience, and we'll get anywhere between 300 and 1,000 people live with us on the stream on a Thursday night, and then over the course of the weekend, we'll end up with an average of 13 to 14,000 people who have viewed the happy hour.
Well, and I'll tell you this right now, for those of you who are content creators who do live streams, go watch one of these, because having professional broadcasters host one of those is way more interesting than anything you're doing. Because
I want to make it clear. Jason said that. Tony didn't say that, but Jason said it.
That's true. I said it. And here's why I said it, though. When I pick up TikTok or Instagram and there's a live stream going on, and it can be a content creator that I know, that I've worked with, but they're normally, I mean, if you're looking at me on the camera, they're normally doing this. Oh, hey, Jim. Oh, what's up, Bob? For 15 minutes, they're not saying anything.
And the craft is to be talking and doing that at the same time. And to be fair, it's easier to do that with an ensemble of people. So, it's typically Bob and Sherry and our social media director, whose name is Heather Furr, or people coming. I've been a guest on it before. 2 weeks ago, we were out here in Denver for Podcast Movement, and we went live from the Airbnb that we had rented. And we were all there, right? So we all kind of poked our heads in, and that vibe is what the listeners want. They're sort of peek behind the curtain. They feel more connected to us, and so that been very successful for us. And so we said, well, how do we take that and generate some revenue out of it, right? Because we're always looking for different ways to generate revenue, because we can't rely on the traditional sort of advertising sources. In addition, we do the typical Facebook posts like everybody else does. We do sponsored posts and whatnot. And so what we've tried to do is put this all together. And rather than going to some big national advertiser, O'Reilly Auto Parts, as an example, right? No disrespect to them. And say to them, hey, here's this, to which they would say, well, good, let's make it part of our advertising campaign, which means they're not going to pay anything more for it. Yep. We call it value added in the industry. But we looked at it and said, well, what are we, and who do we talk to? And we talk to a lot of women. We talk to a lot of adult women, and they got some money to spend. But more important than that is, who can we talk to and who can we really help? Can we help O'Reilly Auto Parts? Sure we can. But there's also a whole other category of advertisers and potential advertisers that we can help. And they're small, medium-sized businesses. And so one example I'll give you is we did a live stream last summer from one of the cast members' backyard. His name is Lamar, and we decided we were going to call it Lamarbecue, because why not? It sounded fun. And so we were able to partner together with a small business that makes barbecue dipping sauce, a small business that makes barbecue tools.
Cool.
And they paid us a little bit of money, and we did Lamarbecue.
That's great.
And the response was amazing. And we did a little bit different than our typical stream. We did it on a different day of the week. We did it on a Saturday, and it was a little bit longer. It was 90 minutes instead of an hour. And so we brought back Lamarbecue again this year for 2023, and we did it back in June. Lamar is an RV fan, right? So he's a camper. Okay. And so this year we did it from an RV park. We did it from Lamar's camper at an RV park in South Carolina. Which, I mean, if you want to talk to your TikTok creators out there, try getting good Wi-Fi at a campground in rural South Carolina, my friends. But we did, and we partnered with a company called Carol's Sausage, and it's an interesting story because Carol's was a family-owned business. It was bought by an entrepreneur a few years ago. Their business had largely been traffic going up and down I-75 in Georgia. Right? So those of you who live in sort of the Midwest know if you're coming from Ohio or Michigan to Florida, you're coming down I-75, right? Yep. And so there's a lot of traffic, and they did a lot of billboards, and they had a good reputation locally, so that was where their business was. How does a company like Carol's Sausage sell their product in Maine? How do they sell their product in California? How do they sell their product in Texas? Well, you could buy advertising. You could buy. There's a lot of things you can buy to get yourself a footprint out there. But what we were able to do is to tie it all together. We actually showed the food being cooked. We spoke to the owner of the company. We created a burger with the barbecue sauce from that earlier client. We call it the Slather Burger. So we put all that together. So we did a sort of virtual sampling of it.
Wow.
And ran a promotion. Said, look, if you want to try it yourself, we're going to give you 15% off. Use a coupon code. And we put that into the chat. And so as a result, now he's got people in Oregon and Washington and northern Maine that would never have discovered him, have now discovered his product. And then we tied that in with, our newsletter. And then we did some on-air contesting with it in the show so that he would get frequency beyond that just one the one event, and we're just wrapping it up. We're wrapping it up for them now, but I can tell you that our Lamarbecue 2023, got about 36 million views on. I'm sorry, 1,000, not million. 36,000 views on Facebook.
Okay.
We just recently did a sampling on Facebook, a sponsored post with Sherry sampling a product called Perbel. You aren't going to use Perbel, Jason. Okay. I'm not going to use Perbel. It's a lotion that you put on your skin. It's got an SPF in it, and it enhances the color of women's skin. It can be a base for other makeup, or it can be just worn itself. Okay. And Sherry demonstrated it on the air, and we launched that last month. She's at 1.2 million views of that.
Wow.
Of that sampling of that product. So, when you look at that and you go, okay, what can we do that's maybe different than just a post on Facebook?
Right.
We can give you the post on Facebook, but we can give you the endorsement, the implied endorsement, the actual endorsement of that product where we're sampling it, we're contesting with it, we're having some fun with it, and we're doing it all really at a price point that is not going to break the bank for a small, medium-sized business, which I think is really critical.
So for the audience out there, whether you're a content creator who has live streams, multiple channels, these are all great ideas on how you can incorporate the brands that you reach out to, that you partner with on, hey, how can I bring this brand to life in more than just a sponsored post in order to be, deliver better value to them and extend that relationship, but also to the brands out there listening. If you find a content creator out there who's got live streams, who's doing a diverse sort of array of content channels and mechanisms, you can go to them and say, hey, we love your creativity. We love your audience. What if we did something bigger than just a sponsored post and got really creative and fun with your live streams and whatnot? Now, all of a sudden, you're creating interesting, useful content for your audience.
Right, because we're not fooling the audience. The audience knows it's sponsored. Whether it's an unboxing or whether it's a sampling or whatever, and whether you're doing it as a content creator, an influencer on a YouTube or on a TikTok, everybody kind of knows, right?
Yeah.
You got paid for it. Everybody kind of knows. But in this way, you're in a way sort of hiding the strings more because you're bringing more fun to it. You're bringing more authenticity to it because we're having a barbecue, man. We're having some fun in a trailer park in South Carolina. It brings more context, I think, to it. And as a result, it gives you a little bit more authenticity and can be more effective for a client, depending on what their, on what their needs are. Because I think at the end of the day, it's authenticity.
Yeah.
And,
well, I love the fact that you guys did the LaMarbecue, and it was prescribed to be something to help deliver relevant messaging and programming for the sponsors. But to the audience, it's like, oh, this is going to be fun. It's relevant. It's cool. All the cast members are going to be there. It's going to be an event. And so you're not forcing it. Like, you're doing something that they would find exciting.
Right. And I think that's the thing. It's got to be on brand for you as the creator.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're not going to do, now we've done some stuff, because even though we're female targeted, we try to stay away from being too pink, if that makes any sense. So we actually did a live stream from Backyard Wrestling. There's a guy who reached out to us in South Carolina, and he's every couple of months he sets up a giant ring. I'll send you the video. Sets up a giant ring in his backyard. And Sherry's like, all of us either have had some interaction with with professional wrestling, whether it's been Saturday morning as a kid, and watching the Chief Jay Strongbow, whoever it was in those days, or you're like, or the more modern, the John Cena's and whoever, the more modern guys, but everybody sort of knows a little bit about it. So this guy's got professional wrestlers. He brings them to his place. He's got some property. He sets up a ring. Food trucks show up. And if I hadn't seen this from my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it. And so we decided to do a live stream from it, and with Sherry and Lamar doing color commentary, and announcing, not that they know anything either, don't know anything about wrestling, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. It was a 90-minute, live stream that we do. And we may do another one, because we do want to be a little bit unexpected. Yeah. You want to do some things, because when we talk about our audience, particularly in radio, we tend to go, oh, they're women, so they don't like this, just sort of by definition. Oh, they're women, so they want soft music. Oh, they're women, so they don't care about NASCAR. They don't. Some of the most rabid NASCAR fans I know are women. Some of those rabid hockey fans I know are women. So, I think we tend to put them into a box, and I think that there's a lot more dynamics than just what we put in the sort of Calgon bath kind of box that we tend to do as broadcasters. So we try to do stuff that's fun and that's different, and it's a little bit unexpected.
Awesome. Well, if we've learned anything on the show today, we have reinforced the idea that South Carolina is all about barbecue and wrestling, which
for sure.
That's a good lesson to learn.
For sure. And I guess the South Carolina Tourism Board is probably going to put me on their do not call list.
Hey, the Righteous Gemstones is popular right now on Max. You guys are not on their radar. They're in good shape. That's fun.
Well,
all right, Tony, tell people where on the interwebs or not on the interwebs that people can find the Bob and Sherry Show.
Sure. The easiest way to find us is www.bobandsheri.com, and you can see all of our craziness there. You can find us on using that same bobandsheri.com. You can find us on YouTube, or if you want to listen to the podcast on any of your podcast or wherever you find your podcasts.
There you go.
Is how we like to say it.
And we'll make sure that we have all of those links in the show notes. And when we come back here in just a second, I'll review where you can get those very easily without having to remember a whole lot of stuff. Tony, man, I honestly really and truly feel like you guys were, way ahead of the curve when no one else was. It's been a pleasure to learn from you. And I hope that everybody out there goes and checks you guys out, because you guys are doing things that are super cool. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
Awesome. As you can imagine, I could talk radio all day. I absolutely love the fact that Tony and the Bob and Sherry team are doing things not to just stay alive, but thrive and evolve with the times. And opening up that big of a network to smaller businesses is really just an incredible godsend for sponsors and advertisers looking to get in front of a large audience very quickly without having to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on national ad campaigns. So find the show by searching for the Bob and Sherry Show where you get your podcasts, or go to bobandsherry.com. And Sherry is SHERI, by the way, bobandsherry.com, all one word. Of course, all the appropriate links to the show, Tony's profile on LinkedIn and such, are all in our show notes. Just go to jasonfalls.com. The latest episodes of Winfluence are now on the homepage, more prominent, so you don't have to go looking for them as much. Find the Tony Garcia episode, and there you are. If you're on Instagram, you can also find the Tony Garcia episode post on my Instagram feed. I'm at Jason Falls there. You can comment on that post and use the hashtag Garcia. Hashtag Garcia. Just drop that in the comments somewhere. That will DM you the link you need to get to the show notes, thanks to my pals at Stampede Social. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone else who may as well. And if you're enjoying Winfluence overall, help us grow. Tell somebody about the show. You probably know someone who might want to know more about influence and influence marketing. Send them to winfluencepod.com or share a link to this episode on your social network of choice. At least tell them to come by and see the new digs, right? I've rearranged things. I'm shooting from a different part of the room. I've got my little shelf behind my head now, so there's a little bit more fun stuff to look at instead of just silly old me. So encourage your friends to come by and check out the show, especially here on the YouTubes. If you have a moment, drop Winfluence a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. We're on them all. The show is now on video as well. As I said, just look for Jason Falls Winfluence on YouTube to see the show as well as hear it. Winfluence is a production of Falls and Partners and presented by Scipio.ai. The technical production is by MPN Studios. Winfluence airs along MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. Thanks for listening, folks. Let's talk again soon on Winfluence.